Upon reaching the second floor, they were met with a scene of unspeakable horror. The master bedroom was a slaughterhouse, drenched in blood, where Lily lay brutally slain. The nightmare repeated in Irene's room. In the children's bedroom, the small, broken bodies of Henry and Terry were sprawled on the floor. Finally, concealed beneath a quilt, they discovered the savagely bludgeoned remains of Min. An entire family had been exterminated. Min Lin, originally from China, immigrated to Sydney to pursue his studies. It was there that he met a fellow Chinese immigrant named Lily. Their relationship blossomed, and they eventually married. Their family grew with the birth of their daughter, Brenda, followed 3 years later by their first son, Henry. Another 3 years brought their second son, Terry. Driven by a shared determination to build a new life, Min and Lily ran a news agency, working tirelessly 7 days a week. Having come from modest backgrounds themselves, they were motivated by a dream to offer their children every opportunity they had lacked, particularly a first-class education. Their relentless effort yielded success. The Lins earned the respect of their local community, and their business thrived. This prosperity allowed them to purchase a family home in the Sydney suburb of North Epping. Living with them was Lily's younger sister, Irene, who also worked part-time at the news agency. The family's fortunes continued to rise. Later, they bought a second house in Maryland's, about 30 minutes away, to accommodate Min's parents, who had also moved to Australia. They were joined by Min's sister, Kathy, and her husband, Robert Xie, completing the family's migration. Kathy and her husband, Robert Xie, first settled in Melbourne and attempted to run a restaurant. The venture struggled, particularly with sourcing chefs from China, and ultimately failed due to lack of profitability. Following this setback, the couple, along with their son, relocated to the outskirts of Sydney to be nearer to Kathy's brother, Min. They moved onto the same street as the Lin family, living just 300 meters away. Kathy began working at her brother's news agency. The two families were extremely close, spending considerable time together and supporting one another. Robert often spent his free time coaching his nephew, Henry, in badminton, Henry's favorite sport. A weekly tradition was established where everyone would gather for Friday night dinner at the grandparents' home in Maryland's. On July 17, 2009, the familiar rhythm of the family dinner continued. The house in Maryland's was filled with the usual warmth and chatter, yet one chair remained heartbreakingly empty. Brenda, then just 15 years old, was absent, away on a school trip to New Caledonia. The journey was a cherished opportunity for the French-language student to immerse herself in a francophone culture, a world away from the suburban life she knew. That evening, her laughter was missed, her presence a silent vacancy in the family fold, as her loved ones gathered, unaware of the devastating finality that the night would soon bring. In the quiet pre-dawn hours of Monday, July 13th, Min drove his daughter Brenda to the airport. The parting was brief and awkward, clouded by the self-consciousness of teenage pride. Feeling embarrassed in front of her peers, Brenda held back any tender display. No hug, no kiss for her father, offering only a few mumbled words of farewell. She dismissed the moment's stiffness, comforting herself with the simple thought that she would be home in just a week, and life would resume as normal. It was a small, regretful moment, one whose profound weight she could never have imagined as she walked away from her father for the last time. The Friday evening at the grandparents' home unfolded with its customary warmth and comfort. As the night drew to a close, Henry's grandparents lovingly asked if their 12-year-old grandson would like to stay over. However, Henry, dedicated to his sport, declined. He had a badminton game the following day and was eager to play. Content from a pleasant family gathering, everyone said their goodbyes and returned to their respective homes, carrying with them the simple, unremarkable peace of a routine Friday night. The next morning, Kathy's phone started ringing early with calls from worried store customers. They were asking when the news agency would open. It was highly unusual for the shop to be closed without notice, especially on its busiest day, Saturday. Unable to reach her brother Min by phone, Kathy grew alarmed. She asked her husband Robert, who was cleaning the garage, to accompany her to Min's house. They arrived at approximately 9 a.m. Their concern immediately deepened upon finding the front door unlocked. Kathy called out for Min and Lily, but only silence answered. They entered the house. Downstairs, everything appeared in its normal place, yet an unsettling stillness filled the air. The family was nowhere to be seen. With no response to her calls, a growing dread prompted Kathy to go upstairs and check the bedrooms. Kathy first went to Min and Lily's bedroom. A horrifying sight appeared to her eyes. There was blood everywhere on the walls, the floor, and on the bed where Lily was lying. Overwhelmed by terror, Kathy rushed to the next bedroom where her sister-in-law, Irene, slept. She was met with the same horrific scene. Irene lay on the bed, covered in blood. Robert urged Kathy not to look any further, but driven by a frantic need to know, she had to check on the children. Knowing Brenda was away, she bypassed her niece's room and entered the boys' bedroom. There, she discovered the final, unspeakable tragedy. Her young nephews, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, lay bloodied on the floor. The attacker had not spared them. In a state of utter panic, Kathy and Robert fled the house. Outside, Kathy dialed the emergency number. She was so horrified she could barely form words, stammering to the operator that she had found her family and was unsure if they were dead or alive. While Kathy struggled on the phone, Robert took action to alert his in-laws. He called them, insisting they take the first available train to Sydney, but withholding the devastating reason. He then decided to drive and collect them himself. A terrified Kathy pleaded with him not to leave her alone at the scene, but he departed despite her desperate appeals. Police arrived to find a distraught Kathy waiting outside the home. The initial emergency call had been unclear, leaving officers uncertain of what they would find, whether they were responding to an injury or a death, and how many victims might be involved. Nothing could have prepared them for the scene inside. The level of violence was so extreme that even seasoned officers were shocked, having never encountered a crime of such brutality before. Lily, Irene, Henry, and Terry were hit repeatedly with some kind of heavy object. The women were startled in their sleep, while Henry and Terry managed to wake up before the assault. This was to be evidenced by the bloodstains that were all over the walls. They must have moved around the room in an attempt to escape the attacker. There was no trace of men anywhere, and police officers began to suspect that he might be responsible for carrying out the crimes. Amid the horror, Kathy clung to a desperate hope. She could not believe her brother, Min, was capable of such violence and pleaded with officers to search again. She suggested he might be hiding, perhaps under the bedspread in the master bedroom. Following her plea, police searched the room once more. There, concealed under the covers, they discovered Min's body. He had suffered the same fate as the others, killed by repeated savage blows from a heavy object, primarily to his head and face. The injuries were so severe that he, like the rest of his family, was rendered nearly unrecognizable. Meanwhile, the unsuspecting Brenda was enjoying the last days of her trip. She and her friends decided to go on Facebook to check on their friends who were staying in Australia. Her friends, who were not with them on the trip, were also curious to see how their trip was going. Brenda, along with her friends, wanted to tell them about their adventures, but to Brenda's surprise, everyone started asking her how she was feeling. She didn't know what it was about, why the concern. One of her friends sent her a link to an article accompanied by a photo of Brenda's house in which the girl could read about the tragic events. Brenda read the article in stunned disbelief, unable to process its claims. She boarded the first available flight back to Sydney, where her Aunt Kathy met her at the airport. It was only upon seeing the profound, unmistakable grief etched on Kathy's face that the shocking truth broke through Brenda's denial. This was no cruel prank. The nightmare was real. At just 15 years old, Brenda could not live independently. Her care fell to her closest remaining adult relatives, her Aunt Kathy and Uncle Robert, who offered her a home with them and their son. The arrangement seemed a natural and compassionate solution. As her closest kin besides her grandparents, and living only a few hundred meters from her old home, they provided stability. Brenda could remain in her familiar neighborhood and continue at her same school. Kathy and Robert assumed the dual role of comforting their grieving niece and taking over the management of her parents' news agency. Investigators meticulously analyzed the crime scene. The absence of any forced entry strongly indicated the killer possessed a key to the home. This detail, among others, pointed unequivocally to an insider. The perpetrator was familiar with the house's layout and, crucially, knew that the family's eldest daughter, Brenda, would not be home that night. Brenda's room was the only one in perfect condition. There were no traces of blood on the door handle, as if the attacker knew that he didn't need to look in that room because no one was there. Forensic analysis of the scene revealed 24 bloody shoe prints, all identical, indicating a lone perpetrator. The prints were from ASICS brand athletic shoes, sized between US 8.5 and 10.5, matching only 3 now discontinued models that had not been produced since 2005. Police quickly ruled out robbery, as nothing was stolen. The extraordinary violence, the sheer number and force of the blows, suggested the killer was driven by deep personal animosity, not theft. Despite this, when questioned, Kathy and Robert could provide no leads. They described Min as universally friendly and likable, with no known enemies. Their statements offered investigators no clarity. The motive for the attack remained a complete mystery. Who would want to murder such a peaceful, harmless family? A critical, unsettling question also arose. Was Brenda, now the family's sole survivor, still in danger? Could she be the killer's next target? Investigators were faced with numerous urgent questions but had no answers. Sometime later, a potential lead emerged. Min had witnessed a burglary near his store in late May, less than 2 months before his murder. Police initially theorized the burglars might have killed him to silence a witness. However, this line of inquiry was thoroughly investigated and yielded no connections. The lead was a dead end. The investigation narrowed its focus to the initial, logical suspect, an insider. The killer was someone with intimate knowledge of the family, someone with access to a key, who could navigate the darkened home after cutting the power, who knew Brenda was away, and who harbored a deep, personal hatred for Min, evidenced by the ferocious overkill that made him unrecognizable. By early 2010, police scrutiny intensified on Robert Xie. His actions on the morning of the murders appeared highly suspicious. Analysis of the emergency call revealed Kathy, in her native tongue, was begging Robert not to leave her alone at the potentially dangerous scene. Despite this, he departed to collect her parents. Investigators also noted that Robert, a trained medical professional, made no attempt to check the victims for signs of life or administer first aid. In the aftermath, Robert's actions raised suspicion. He and Kathy assumed control of Min's news agency and properties. Notably, Robert then evicted his elderly in-laws from their Maryland's home, forcing them to find new accommodation. Despite these red flags, Robert had a solid alibi for the murder night, corroborated by his wife Kathy. He claimed they watched TV until 2 a.m. and never left the house. With strong suspicions but no concrete evidence, Investigators obtained authorization to install covert surveillance cameras inside Robert and Kathy's home. In May 2010, police questioned Kathy again, specifically asking about her husband Robert's shoes. They knew he owned ASICS trainers, the same model that matched the bloody footprints at the crime scene. After informing Kathy about the 24 matching footprints, covert surveillance footage soon showed Robert at home, meticulously cutting an ASICS shoebox, size 9.5, into pieces, soaking them and flushing them down a toilet. This prompted a full search of the couple's home, focusing on the garage Robert had cleaned the morning the bodies were discovered. There, under a chest of drawers, investigators found a small, suspicious stain. The sample was sent to a specialized lab in the United States for advanced DNA analysis, as Australian forensic capabilities at the time were more limited. The wait for the forensic results was lengthy, but it yielded the breakthrough investigators needed. The sample from Robert Xie's garage was found to contain the DNA of 4 of the 5 victims. Based on this evidence, Robert Xie was arrested in May 2011. He steadfastly maintained his innocence. His wife, Kathy, refused to believe he was capable of the crimes, convinced there had been a terrible mistake. Brenda, who was living with them, also remained certain of her uncle's innocence. Seeking more evidence, investigators enlisted a fellow inmate to befriend Robert in their shared cell and elicit a confession. The plan worked. Robert eventually confessed several key details to the inmate. He admitted to sedating his wife, Kathy, with sleeping pills the night of the murders so she would not notice him leaving. He revealed he had purchased the murder weapon, a hammer, from a store he knew had no security cameras. He boasted about using his medical knowledge to subdue his victims. He stated he never intended to be the one who discovered the bodies, as that would draw suspicion, but he could not prevent the chain of events that led him and Kathy to the house. A significant portion of this damning information, however, came solely from the inmates' testimony, as not all of their conversations were recorded. The prosecution argued that Robert Xie was driven by 2 powerful motives: jealousy and obsession. First motive: jealousy and resentment. Robert, once a respected professional in China, struggled to find success in Australia. His restaurant venture failed, and he remained unemployed after moving to Sydney in 2006. He felt constantly diminished by comparisons to his prosperous brother-in-law, Min, and resented Min's smooth adaptation and financial success. Second motive: sexual obsession with Brenda. A darker motive emerged during the trial through Brenda's testimony. She revealed that Robert had been sexually obsessed with her for years, assaulting her on multiple occasions before the murders. This obsession was corroborated by her grandfather, who testified he once found Robert standing over a sleeping Brenda in the middle of the night, an encounter that left Robert visibly agitated when he was seen. Robert's fixation on Brenda provided a chilling explanation for sparing her life. As the sole survivor, she would naturally be placed in the care of her closest relatives, him and Kathy, to ensure she had no other option. He later evicted her grandparents from their home, severing that potential refuge. With these acts, Robert achieved his twisted goals. Brenda was under his control, and he had assumed management of the family's prosperous business, finally shedding his image as a failure. Impact on the trial and bail. Brenda's devastating testimony fundamentally altered the case, contributing to a series of legal complications. Robert Xie's trial had to be restarted 4 separate times. His repeated applications for bail were denied. Only after 4 years and 7 months in custody was he granted bail in December 2015, under stringent conditions: 24-hour electronic monitoring, a curfew, and a requirement to report to police 3 times daily. The 4th and final trial for Robert Xie commenced in June 2016. In January 2017, the jury delivered its verdict, finding him guilty on all counts of murder. The court sentenced Xie to life imprisonment for each of the 5 murders, with no possibility of parole, ensuring he would never be released from prison. An appeal against his sentence was filed and swiftly rejected in February of the same year. To this day, Kathy Xie remains convinced of her husband's innocence, believing he was wrongfully convicted for another person's crimes. Investigators had questioned how she knew to direct them to look under the quilt for Min's body, a suggestion that led to its discovery after a 4-hour search. They suspected Robert may have tipped her off, but Kathy insists it was merely a desperate intuition. Her parents, the victim's own mother and father, hold a diametrically opposed view. They see their son-in-law as a monster, whose consuming jealousy and depraved obsession with Brenda drove him to slaughter 5 innocent members of their family. 8 years after the murders, Brenda Lynn broke her public silence in a televised interview. For the first time, she identified herself as the victim of Robert Xie's sexual abuse, a fact that had been concealed during the trials under the pseudonym S.A.B. She revealed the abuse intensified after she was forced to live under his roof following her family's slaughter. In the years since the tragedy, Brenda has shown remarkable resilience, earning a university degree and getting her driver's license. Yet these milestones are haunted by profound loneliness, achieved in a world emptied of the family she should have been able to share them with. The ache of a single, ordinary moment has become a lifelong prison. To this day, Brenda is tortured by the memory of that morning at the airport, the last time she saw her father alive. Crippled by teenage self-consciousness, she held back. She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss his cheek. She didn't whisper the 3 words that now echo endlessly in the silence he left behind. I love you. That small, forgivable regret has hardened into an eternal sentence. For there are no more mornings, no more airports, no more chances to say goodbye. The finality is absolute. The door to that possibility is not just closed. It was destroyed the night he was taken from her, leaving only the cold, unforgiving wall of never again.